glass up high. Turn it up, it's time. Tall boy on the line. Loud breeze, they will last. Raise your glass up high.
Welcome back to episode 305 of the Tall Boy Radio podcast. And as we always say, who knows where it goes when the beer flows? Well, that beer is taking us out to sea tonight. But before we do, we need to hear some cautionary tales about that, some information for you before you go on your cruises. It really is some food for thought. But before we get to that, let's say hello to the other host, Gaz, who's not sat next to me tonight. He's in another room. Not too far away, mind.
No, evening all, evening the world. I hope you're all well out there in listener land. Yeah, I'm not in TBR HQ tonight. I'm about 20 yards that way, and I'm at my own house because I think Beans is feeling under the weather a little bit. But he is a trooper and he's soldiering on. But I'm looking forward to this episode. It's not something that I've sort of in a way thought about because I've never partaken in one of these activities we're about to talk about. So I'll be very, very, very interested in where it leads and the information that can be provided by our guest.
Indeed. Yeah, absolutely. Now, as Gaz there alluded to, now I've taken a couple of cruises in my life, only two, and both of them down the Norwegian fjords. However, there's some things I never thought about before I booked those trips. And we're joined by Jamie, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what we should be thinking about before we go and book those cruises. Give us some real food for thought. So, Jamie, did you want to say hello and tell us a little bit about your backstory and why you got involved with this?
Absolutely. Yes. I'm delighted to be invited to be with you all today. It's really important that sort of a warning be issued to folks because they're so unaware of the dangers that are inherent in taking a cruise. And there's a reason for that. And hopefully we'll get into just what those reasons are that you are so unaware of what could happen. As was I, when back in 2005, my daughter, Ashley, was dating a guy who wanted to take her on a cruise, ostensibly for her birthday. But what he ended up doing, it was just a little 3-day cruise out of Long Beach, California, down to Ensenada, Mexico, and back. But what he ended up doing was inviting a whole bunch of his friends to go on this cruise with them. And she was increasingly upset about it. And the main reason for that was because he was fighting drug addiction, her boyfriend. And these friends of his were all partiers, and her biggest goal in her relationship with him was to make sure that he got clean and sober. And she felt like that was going to be a big setback for him. So she was not happy about it, but she went. And, you know, if you ever run across her story, there's a whole 48 hours on it, on her story. He will tell you that he was addicted to Vicodin and methadone, but he was a heroin addict. And as some people know, heroin addicts, when they are trying to come off of heroin, are often given methadone. And he smuggled onto the ship in an emptied out bottle of Dayquil. He poured liquid methadone and snuck it and Vicodin onto the cruise. Of course, cruise lines say that they have a zero tolerance for drugs. Well, that's not quite true. And somehow they had a fight because she wanted to go to bed early so they could get back up in the morning and go out to land to the port. And he wanted to go into the casino and party with his friends. And I'm sure she made a big stink about it, knowing her. You know, she was up in his face about that, I'm sure. And so somehow she was very, very anti-drug, very anti-drug. and was well known for letting people know it too. And somehow that liquid methadone ended up in her system. And while they went out and partied on, she died. And at the point in time the next morning that he realized there was a problem, he called. The medical team responded in a very substandard way to her medical emergency. I was told that she was possibly viable at the time they arrived, but their attempts, after the nurse arrived, it took 30 minutes to get the defibrillator to her, and by then it was too late. And I got to tell you, when something like that happens that is mysterious and suspicious, to say the least, we want the best investigation. We want to know what happened and when and why and who was involved and how do I get justice for her. And all of those doors were slammed shut for me, and as they are for any victim of something similar, whether it's a sexual assault, a suspicious death, on and on and on. The tragedies that can occur that's how they're handled. And in America, if you're a victim of crime or a perpetrator of a crime on a cruise ship, the FBI is the investigative authority. But even there, and we tend to think, oh, the FBI, then they're going to be my knight in shining armor. They're going to ride in on their big white horses and give me everything I'm looking for. And that's also not true. Recently I did a conference in Orlando, Florida on victims of crime. And one of the main things we sought to inform everyone thereof was, what's the difference between a victim of crime on land and their approach to assistance and investigation and justice, and what a victim on a ship experiences? What are the hurdles? What are the doors that are not open to them that are open to land-based victims of crime? And they're numerous and they're horrific. In fact, at that presentation, I found an article that had appeared a few years ago in the New York Times that said that one U.S. Coast Guard official said that the chances of a crime being successfully prosecuted occurring on the high seas is 1%.
Wow.
1%.
Wow.
And so there you go. That's why I do what I do. I was not one of the starting members of the organization, but right as they grouped the 4 families that started it together, I came in, and the man who was in charge asked me to be president of it. And so for 20 years now, almost, that's what I've been doing.
Thank you for your role in that sort of thing. Can I just ask, it's probably a really silly question, but why do we know why it is only 1%? What is it? Is it jurisdiction? Is it red tape? Is it, what are the main reasons as to why it is only 1%? Is it lack of witnesses, or what? I don't know. To me, it doesn't make any sense that the crime on the sea would be convicted at such a lower degree than a crime on land. I just don't see the rationale for that.
Okay, and that's you're just like everybody else out there. That's part of the problem. None of us suspect that there would be any difference. As an American, as any American, and excuse me for focusing on, because I'm more familiar with American response than I am any European or Australian or any other nation's response. But you assume I, as an American, when I would take a cruise, that my rights as an American, the laws that protect me as an American go with me when I get on that ship. Because I mean, look, I bought my ticket in America, I got on the ship in America, and I come back into America. So rightfully, and because nobody else told me any differently, that's what I assume until something tragic happens and you discover that once you get, typically it's 12 miles out from the shore of, the coastline, you are then in international waters. And let me tell you something, that's like the wild, wild west in America way back. There are no laws out there, no oversight. The jurisdictional quagmire that exists is unbelievable. Who's in charge? Well, she was an American, but she was in Mexico. They have a right, but the ship is flagged in Panama. They're the registry. So they have a right. So bam, right away, you've got all these conflicting investigative authorities that some of them want to have the right to investigate and some of them want to do this, so that's the whole idea of ships registry, which now very few and people don't know to pay attention to that when they go to take a cruise. They need to find out what country is this ship I'm going to be on registered in. And chances are it's some third world, underdeveloped little country that enables the cruise line to escape all of the laws, labor laws, health and safety standards, port fees, taxes, all of that. It's very convenient. It's often called flags of convenience, and there's a reason for that. It's very convenient, not for you, not for the people, but for the cruise industry. So it really constrains what laws apply to passengers and crew on these ships.
And is that something that you, as I say, president of the International Cruise Victims sort of organization, is that something that you are in a position to try to change, to lobby the government in terms of actually, is that what you're actually doing in terms of we can't have this maelstrom of it's registered in this country, but the people that are on the ship are this nationality, the crew are this nationality, or whatever it may be. Are you in a position to be able to lobby government to say this needs changing and this is what we believe should be the case?
Absolutely. One of the first things we tell a new victim when they find us is, right away, and people don't understand this, but I will advise them to get a maritime attorney if something's happened to them, and to go to their congressional representative, because that's kind of how we got our start. We got Representative Elijah Cummings in the House to listen to what happened to these 4 families I mentioned earlier, what happened to them. All 4 of them had loved ones that went missing off of cruise ships, presumed overboard. And so they said, there's a problem. There's a problem. And the congressman had a hearing, and the cruise industry was there, and we victims were there. And the Congressman Cummings required that the cruise industry meet with us as victims and see what we could both come up with that they would agree to do voluntarily to increase protection for victims, or for passengers, hopefully before they ever became victims. And And we met, and they agreed to absolutely nothing. And I mean nothing. One of the first things we asked for was, something the hotel industry had for decades. We said, can you put a peephole in the cabin doors so that people don't open their door and then get, the door busted down, open, and assaulted? That's the number one crime that happens on cruises is sexual assault. And they kept saying, oh no, you see, that's a marine grade door. And you can't just drill a hole in a marine grade door. And we're like, but come on, hotels have had it. It's a clear and easy to implement, stopgap of, what is your number one crime? I should think you'd want to do it and be the first cruise line to boast that you did it. And but no, and so I asked, and this still cracked me up, do you have reciprocity among the cruise lines? Because they don't vet their crew themselves. They have little companies inside all of these little underdeveloped countries that do the vetting and send them, and nothing about it. Like, the people in the child care centers, you don't know who they are, and you let your children go there. You wouldn't do that at home, without having references and all kinds of things. So that's just one example, but there are all these elements that I said, do you have reciprocity? You tell a letter goes out to all because there's an organization known as CLIA, Cruise Lines International Alliance. Do you share that? This guy was fired for inappropriate behavior or assault or whatever. And they go, oh, no, that would be against their civil rights. That would not be good. And so I said, well, I suspect you share people who count cards in your casinos, don't you? And, they had to back off of that one. But it's amazing how hard they fought not to do anything. But they've always been able to. Yeah. And finally, Congressman Cummings said, okay, well, it's going to take legislation then. If y'all won't do anything, it's going to take legislation. And in 2010, we got passed the Cruise Vessel Safety and Security Act, and President Obama signed it into law in July of 2010. And it was the first and most effective legislation that's ever influenced how they do and treat their passengers.
Yeah.
So we're pretty proud of it, but there's lots more that needs to be done, and we stay on top of it.
Yeah, amen to that. And like you talk about these victims, and they aren't isolated incidents, are they? You only have to take a look at your website to see that these aren't isolated incidents. It really isn't uncommon. And troubling, like you said there, in terms of the number one crime committed on a cruise ship. And it seems crazy when you're talking about a holiday and passengers all together, you would think having a good time, looking forward to their holidays. The idea that a crime could be committed there is the furthest thing from our thoughts. Yet, like you say, sexual assault is the number one. And a third of those assaults are against children, aren't they? And that is a real concern.
Good for you for knowing that. Because most people are stunned when I tell them that, a third of those sexual assaults are committed against minors. And that's something that we fight tooth and nail to have in the breakdown of the crimes, because that's one of the things the CVSSA required, was that all crimes be reported and made public quarterly. And we wanted that sexual assault category broken down and including then a separate reporting of sexual assaults against minors. Man, did the money start coming out in Congress. The lobbyists were out in force to make sure that didn't happen.
That's scary. I mean,
Isn't
we all
I
it?
suppose in a way. Sorry, I suppose in a way that when you talk about there needs to be some sort of legislative procedure going on, that would then mean that there is then an on cost and that there's then a cost associated with that, and then I suppose then you fall into that. Well, who picks up that cost, and is that transferred? Is it the owner of the ship that bought that? Who picks up the cost for all these additional measures that you would want to implement? And I suppose that's where the red tape comes in as well, because it's who actually does pick up the cost.
You were breaking up a little bit, but I'll push back on some of what you said to a certain extent. Because yes, okay, peepholes cost money, right? Yeah, they would have to do that. You're right. But having medical care that is reliable and responsible, and is, I mean, you have guidelines, issue the guidelines, make them follow the guidelines. You say we have a zero tolerance for drugs, make that be so. There are all kinds of things that I think that may not be hanging on have a price tag hanging off of them. One of that might be the duty to warn. Hey, you know what? When people get on a ship, tell them, hey, this is like a floating city, and we want you to be aware that, things happen everywhere. So you still can't let your guard down completely. Be aware of your surroundings just like you would in a city. And it's sad to find out why they don't do that. And I actually, I'm always on my soapbox about that. And I had an attorney tell me recently why they don't. And that's because if they did, then they would be liable for a duty to warn. So if I've warned you of something, I have the duty to make sure you're safe from it. So I just find that appalling. That's just appalling.
It is appalling. There's no two ways about it. You know what I mean? By acknowledging the fact that they have awareness of it, there's an expectancy that they then have to do something about it. And that is the reason why they will not forewarn, which is utterly, utterly shocking. Now, like you say, when you run about your children on a cruise ship, it's a little bit easier for me. My children, the cruise that we went on in August, my children are 8 and 6, so I ain't letting them out on my sight anyway. You can't do.
People do though. They do.
They do, and I saw it myself. So in terms of that, then, so there's been a couple of documentaries on Netflix. Obviously, there's the very notorious Poop Cruise, which has got a very humorous name, but I think if you experienced it, there's absolutely nothing funny about that at all. And then there was Amy Bradley is Missing as well, isn't there? Which you appeared on yourself. Did you want to tell us a little bit about that? Because that in itself is really quite shocking. So this is a family that went on. The daughter was obviously a little bit older than my kids are, but the idea that you can head out on a cruise with your family, with your son and your daughter at the age that they were, and come back without a member of that family is heartbreaking.
Isn't it? Yes. The Bradleys have been members of International Cruise Victims as long as I have. So I've known them. I've known Amy's story for a long time. And when Netflix started this documentary, which was about a year ago, maybe even a little longer, I was thrilled when they contacted ICV and said, we want the voice of ICV on this documentary, because we want you to tell us, basically the kind of things I'm here to tell you all. All right. And to know that what happened to Amy is not isolated, it could happen to anyone. I was only too happy to get the word out in that way through that platform, because it's hard for us to get the word out. That I'm kind of backing up right here, but the media, the mainstream media, makes a whole lot of money off of cruise ad revenue, right? So they don't want to put anything on that's going to affect that. Heaven forbid we should warn people or let people see the underbelly of that cruise industry, right? But so in Amy's case, the sadness of it, that if your listeners watched it, if you haven't, I urge you to do it. It's so gut wrenching to think they wouldn't make a call out on the ship to say, we have a missing person, yada yada yada, whatever it takes. But no, and it's their lack of concern for what happened is just unbelievable, and that is so not isolated.
No.
These 4 families that started ICV, I know one of them was an unsolved murder, and that was the George Smith family. Their son went overboard on his honeymoon. But the others, I think they probably always had inkling that the same thing could have happened to their child or their parents that happened to Amy. But the fact that it's out there on the high seas, what kind of proper investigation are you going to get? You're not. And that, here's another element, kind of back to your question, Gaz, the association between the cruise industry, the FBI, and the U.S. Coast Guard is like this. And that's because the cruise industry hires retired FBI agents and retired Coast Guards into their operation. And it's sort of I scratched your back, now you scratch mine. And it really gets in the way of the true safety and security of passengers on a cruise. It really does.
Yeah.
So to me, you look at if there's a crime that's been committed on a cruise ship in the high seas or on the high seas, that's contained. So it's not like when you say it's a floating city. Absolutely, I agree with you that it's like a floating city. But you can the perpetrators, for example, could move across the border and go to X, Y, or Z. But on a boat, that's contained. So if there's a crime on that boat, the victim is on the boat, the perpetrators are on the boat, the people, I'm still struggling to understand how it can't be investigated. I really can't just get past that point, because it's somebody that is on that manifest, or potentially not if you've got smuggling and going on, but theoretically it's somebody on that manifest that has perpetrated that crime. So surely it's only a matter of process to then eliminate before you get to the person that's done it. Whereas if it's on land, they could flee, they could go to a neighbouring county, they could go to neighbouring wherever, and they might slip the net as such. But on a boat, it's contained because you know who's there.
I'm with you 100%. I'm still stymied by that.
Yeah.
But the problem then is who is arranging, who is the first on the scene to conduct the investigation, right? Secondly, you've got the cruise line that nobody's watching them. Who's to keep them from tidying up the crime scene? You know what they do? They take I think it's, okay, I can't believe I can't think of the number of hours, but it's like a 3 or 8 hours, ridiculous amount of time course in crime scene preservation, evidence collection, victim handling, perpetrator handling, all that. Uh, 3 hours or 8 hours, either one.
Yeah.
You get nothing. And there's nobody to stop the cleaners from going in and cleaning up the crime scene. We have heard that, seen that time and time and time again. So you've got all of that happening. I'll tell you a story that sets the stage for this beautifully. One of the women that leads ICV with me was sexually assaulted, brutally raped by a crew member. He was hired as a janitor, but on the night she was assaulted, they were running low on security guards. So they put him, the janitor, in a security guard uniform and set him loose. And he followed my friend back to her cabin and knocked on her door. She thought it was her friend she had gone on the cruise with at the door. And she, opened it, and he burst in and raped her. Now, put yourself in her shoes. You've been raped by a security guard. Who do you have to call on a cruise ship when you've been assaulted? The security department. And so she called. They came. They sat on the bed where the rape occurred, asked her how much she had had to drink. And when she told them, over the course of the entire day and the night, I probably had maybe 4, umbrella cocktails. And so they then stood up and said, well, it seems like you need to control your drinking. And then they finally let her, and just when you think this story can't get any worse, when they finally let her go to the ship doctor, they got down there, she and her best friend, and the nurse there handed her and her friend 2 trash bags and sent them back to the cabin to collect their own evidence.
No.
And the rapist said to, it was consensual. Doesn't every rapist say something like that? Probably, a huge portion of them. And they gave him a lie detector test, and he failed it. And to this day, nothing ever happened to him. Because there's no follow through. There's no agency that really is, going to make it come full circle. It's just not going to happen. So,
Gaz, I don't know if you're seeing sort of the pattern here, the same pattern that I'm seeing. Normally, we're sat next to each other so we can give each other a nudge, on poignant parts. But, you asked the question as to how these things can happen. It's because, in a major city, there's, we say it's floating out at sea. In this case, it's not policed. The people you've got to complain to a lot of the time are the people who are perpetrating the crimes. In the case of Amy Bradley, this is a grown adult. Someone who drove a car, someone who rented an apartment, and she went missing from the ship. Did she get off under her own volition? Was she taken off the ship? Did she ever leave the ship? Nobody really knows. There's reports of sightings on the island on which they were docked, which, if true, are even more heartbreaking to know that what she's suffering and the fate that she's suffered since. If you look at the George Smith who went overboard. And these are not isolated incidents. So when I sent this website onto my wife to look at, and like I said, it's her 40th birthday next year, and we have a cruise book for that. She said, "Do you want to go on it? Why are you sending me this?" I want you to be aware, because I wish someone would have shared this with me before I went on the first cruise that I ever went on. Don't get me wrong, I've had good experiences. We've been on the P&O Iona, and I've not had a bad experience or seen anything bad while I'm on there. But you see these things and you read the stories. They don't put a call out when there's somebody missing. They're very, very good at covering this stuff up, and it's a real concern. It's terrifying that a website like this has to exist. But I could be a member of all these groups on Facebook that are interested in cruising. I've read all the details about cruising, but it was only when Vic Ferrari sent on, Jamie's details to us that I'd actually come across this website. And that gives you an idea of the size of the problem. And part of the size of the problem is the amount of money that this industry generates, because it's absolutely vast, isn't it?
Yeah, very wealthy, very, very, very wealthy. But you're absolutely right. It's just tragic that people. I'll tell you a funny thing. In the U.S., there's a magazine that goes out called AARP, which is for retired people. Well, everybody knows a lot of retired people like to cruise, right? So one of the first things we thought was, let's go. I know we need to have AARP warn their readers. We need to, call them, talk to them about giving them some information to put in their magazine. And they just laughed at us, saying, are you kidding? Do you know how much ad revenue we get in our magazine from the cruise industry? We're not about to, piss them off. And so from all different angles, you're kept from knowing, like with Amy, the fact that you said nothing happened on the cruise you went on, but you know what? You don't know that.
True enough.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't have heard it. Just like they wouldn't let those people hear that Amy was missing. You have no idea who died on that cruise, who got raped on that cruise, who went missing from that cruise. You're not going to hear about it.
Yeah.
No, it's a true story. Full enough. So, I mean, my dad's done a couple of cruises as well, and he did one from Southampton out to the Caribbean, and twice they saw the helicopter land on the ship to take someone away. Yeah, which is not a good sign, and he has no details as to what happened.
And you wouldn't.
And you wouldn't find.
But you know what? The fact that there was a helicopter that was able to come in and get the person is huge. There was an incident just this past May where a gentleman and his wife went on a cruise, and she had a heart attack. And they came in and they resuscitated her. They took her to the medical bay, and they told her husband, look, she's going to have another one. We need to get her off this ship. They were on an island in the Bahamas. They're a private Royal Caribbean island.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, absolutely. And he goes, but it's going to be expensive. It's going to cost $15,000. And he said, here's my credit card. And they said, oh, no, it has to be cash. Who has $15,000 cash on a 3-day cruise to some island in the Bahamas? And it turned out he finally convinced him to take his card. But by the time they negotiated that, and it took for them to get there to her, she died.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
So you're not going to hear about that.
No.
You're not going to hear about that.
So one of the things that you've talked about as well, I listened to the Vic Ferrari episode that you did as well, and so we've looked at the crimes perpetrated by some of the staff there we just spoke about, but also some of those crimes are perpetrated by other passengers you don't know. But the cruise I was on held, I think, 5,500 passengers. It was at full capacity when we left, and I don't know anything about those people. How much of a part does alcohol play?
Huge. Anytime you get a confined gathering of people and alcohol is free flowing, and it is, they have no compunction to limit anybody. So it's they do that little all you can drink for one price package, right? Which tells you they're not responsible for how much alcohol they serve passengers. And yet they want to claim, they're not responsible for any, thing that happens after that either, which is just terrible. Of course, alcohol plays into, fights, brawls. We've been hearing a lot about these brawls that break out, to sexual assaults, to accidents, to overboards. I had a phone call last Sunday morning, early, from a young woman in Ireland whose sister, in 2006, she and her sister went with her parents. She was 12, her sister was 15. They went with her parents on a cruise, connecting cabins. The parents went to dinner. The girls did their little kid thing around the ship. And somehow the 15-year-old wandered into a bar and was served 10 drinks in that little short period of time. And somehow they staggered back to the cabin, got her in bed, but the parents came back, saw what had happened, and were furious, of course. And they were like, okay, tucked her in bed and went, tomorrow, they're gonna have their comeuppance. Well, a few minutes after that, they heard a scream coming from the girls' cabin, and the one who had had all the alcohol had gone out to their balcony, leaned over the railing to throw up, and went over and was gone.
Wow.
15 years old. And just this past Sunday, her younger sister, now a grown woman, 19 years later, called International Cruise Victims to say there was a discrepancy in her story on our website. And I said, sweetheart, rewrite that story then. That's your story to tell. Send it to us. We'll put it on the website. Her dad committed suicide a few years after she died. I mean, these are the kind of tragedies, y'all.
Yeah. Difficult to listen to, isn't it, Gary?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's and I suppose whether it's cruising or holidaying as such, but if you holiday on the main line, obviously, as Jamie's just said, it's slightly different. But to go on something that should be fun, exciting, exhilarating, and then to come home with a family member that's missing, or a crime that's been committed that won't be investigated correctly. Well, it's heartbreaking, and for the families and friends of the victims, the fact that there's no closure, that they don't know that must be genuinely heartbreaking. And I'm not saying it will be easy, but if there was a finality to it and you did know, at least you have closure. Whereas at the moment you don't, and it must be awful. I can't imagine what the victims go through. It's heartbreaking. It is. It's a tragedy.
It really is.
It is.
Every time, all of us have talked about this. Just the sight of a cruise ship. If I'm somewhere and I see a cruise ship, it's a trigger. It's a trigger. So the secondary victimization is ongoing. We go to Congress still. We have a bill that was introduced both in the House and the Senate recently that has a fat chance of getting passed now, because it calls for the creation of a new agency that oversees maritime incidences like there is for aviation, commercial aviation. There, need to be laws about when someone dies on a cruise ship, do they get left in the port where they died, or do they get to come home in the little morgue that's on the cruise ship and get the kind of care and investigation from they could get in their home country. And there's a fight against that. It just goes on and on and on. One of the things I'm really concerned about now is defibrillators all over the ship. Hotels have them, every public building, airports, you name it, has defibrillators, but not cruise ships. And now there's been a bill that requires it, but they're still not implemented. They won't do anything voluntarily, I can tell you that. So my curiosity lately is, do they have Narcan? Is Narcan on every cruise ship so that in case of, my God, we all know about the fentanyl crisis, so that they can combat. Narcan would have saved my daughter's life just from the methadone. But it was never done. It was never, given. So I worry about that. Just trying to find out whether they have it is almost an insurmountable act,
Why are there not defibrillators?
I'm sorry?
Why are there not defibrillators on cruises? Why is that not the case?
Well, I could guess it would look bad, wouldn't it? For somebody to be being publicly, worked on with a defibrillator. And I'm going to tell you something else that really upsets me, but I've seen too much evidence to think that it's, anything but true. And that is when someone is injured or sick, and let's say in my daughter's case, let's say they had, been delayed like they were with that defibrillator, but she had been resuscitated, finally, but was in a vegetative state. They could be held liable for their lack of proper response, right? Negligence, wrongful death, right? But since she died, they were not at all liable for what happened because of a little known law in America called DOSHA, Death on the High Seas Act, which was a law that was passed in 1920 to give the widows and surviving children of a seafarer who died at sea some semblance or formulaic equivalent of what that seafarer would have made over the course of a lifetime, right? So over the years and through all the drastic changes in the maritime, atmosphere, the cruise industry figured out how to translate that into, we don't owe anybody anything, whether we're liable or not, if they didn't depend on the person who died for some kind of support or income. So my daughter's life was worthless on that ship, and the day she died. The lady who died because they delayed getting the helicopter to her. She was retired. She was older, had no source of income. Worthless. It costs them a whole lot less if you die.
Wow.
There was a young woman, talk about a hideous story. This just happened in June. America, who graduated, a beautiful young Black woman, graduated magna cum laude from college, and she and her best friend went on a cruise to celebrate. Well, they went on an excursion, and it was probably, I think it was like snorkeling, a catamaran. They went out snorkeling, and when they and the men that worked the crew thought she very, very attractive. And so they gave her all kinds of alcohol and what have you. And she finally said, "Hey, whoa, this is not happening. Stop." And so when they got back into dock, they told them, "We've cut the motors. You can get off now." And so she said it was taking a while, I think, for everybody to get off. And she went, "You know what? I have got to go to the bathroom so bad. I'm going to just slip in the water and go." And well, they had not cut the engines off. And in fact, they think the engines were in reverse. And the woman got caught in them and she lost both her legs, both. And they airlifted her to NASA, which was the closest medical center, just to save her life, right? But it looked precarious. Of course, she had lost a lot of blood. So they airlifted her to not to the big fancy trauma unit in Miami, the big fancy medical, hospital that had a renowned trauma center, to another hospital. And her attorney was telling me this story. And I said, hey, you know what? I got to stop you. And, if you quote me on this, I'll say you lied, but I bet I know why. And he said, oh, I know exactly why. So that she wouldn't live. But she did. She did. And, but now she's 22 years old. One of her legs was lost up into the hip joint. So, when I hear people say, and you got to excuse me for this, that, well, I've been on cruises and, it's been great fun, and I'm sure it has been, and it would be, but my mindset now, because I know all this, is, do I want to give my money to people who do that? I'm not sure. I got to rethink about that, but it does give you cause to, review.
Oh, no doubt. Listen, I'll be getting my wife to listen to this back and just get her take on it. You know what I mean? She might feel differently after it.
Well, people tend to, it's such an affordable trip. It looks so nice, and you just want it to be good. So we tell ourselves a lot of consciousness soothing falsities, and we're led into, a sense of security that is really not there, and I see it. I see why and how it happens,
So your website then offers a pamphlet, doesn't it, for people? So the people who are intent on doing it regardless, it gives us some advice and tips on staying safe. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's called Don't Snooze Before You Cruise. And because we're not oblivious to the fact that there are a lot of people who, I'll be careful. I'll watch, I'll be aware, but I still want to go. So in order to help them increase their safety and security, we offer this. We let them know that, they are relinquishing their rights as a citizen of, for us in America, as a citizen of the United States, when you get on that cruise ship. Know that when you go, you've relinquished those rights. Don't go anywhere by yourself on a cruise ship, especially, your children. And lots of times, like bridesmaids for a wedding that's their party, their event, instead of going to Las Vegas, they take a cruise, but stay together, have a buddy. Take out insurance. It's not very expensive. You can get travel insurance and travel assistance because, like it would have paid for that helicopter that came to get the people that you've seen. And it, some of that is covered. Make sure you have cell phone coverage. Let your provider know that you're going on a cruise. Tell them what cruise it is, what route it's taking, and they'll make sure you have cell coverage. Because I think about that too. I think if my daughter had that, she could have called me, and said something's wrong. And there, to gosh, I wish I had it in front of me, but please do go on our website, www.internationalcruisevictims.org, and look at the tips that we have. Like one for parents that's important is, all youth activities on a cruise ship stop at 11 p.m. So if you're letting your kids go do those things, expect them back by 11 and make that a firm curfew, because there's nothing else going on that cruise ship that's good that's happening after 11. So be aware of all these things. Don't let anybody serve you a drink without you seeing it made. Watch it. All kinds of things like that people are having a good old time and they're letting their guard down, and they think, no, it's the safest form of vacation, because the cruise industry will tell you all about how safe it is, and you let your guard down. But you really can't. You really can't afford to do that.
No, it comes quite a surprise to me. I don't mind telling you. A lot of the stories that I do see, I mean, maybe it's because it's, your website and they operate more heavily out of the United States. Royal Caribbean seems to get a lot of a mention. I mean,
Lately, yeah.
Yeah, the problem isn't just theirs, though, is it?
No. That's one of the main questions that I'm often asked is, well, which cruise line is the safest? And there is no safest cruise line. And it's because they all, the laws, the rules of the high seas and, are the same for all of them. One would think, and I read some statistics lately that per capita Disney actually has, is right up there with, the others in terms of assaults and that kind of thing. So I cannot say that there's one, you should, you'll be fine if you just go on this cruise line. Of course there are, some that are, but go on the portal. You can go to the U.S. Coast Guard, or actually, sorry, it's the Department of Transportation. And, you can Google Department of Transportation cruise ship crime stats, and you will see quarterly what they are. Not that they're a true representative. For one thing, you're only seeing Americans. You're only seeing crimes committed against Americans. And I think that's false representation. We think that's everybody. Plus, the cruise lines themselves notifies the FBI and labels the crime. Right? Now, you can say that maybe you label what really is a sexual assault inappropriate touch. That doesn't get reported. You get robbed of something, anything under $10,000 in value, not reported. So, there are a lot of factors in there. Some, I think, is just the way the law was written. Unfortunately, we keep working to improve it. And some of it is the cruise lines mislabeling, underreporting, trying to convince. That's another one. The cruise industry will often try to get you not to report it. Especially a young woman who's reporting an assault. I know of a young woman who was assaulted. I think she was either 15 or 16. And the FBI said to her, do you really want to report this? Because do you realize this could ruin that young man's life?
Yeah, horrendous.
What about her life?
Yeah.
What about her life? So, or they want to go, hey, guess what? I know your son was sexually assaulted in a gross and horrific way. But what if we offer you and your family a free cruise?
Yeah, it's not right.
So they try to get you not to report it. So
I'm not sure a free cruise would compensate for that, would it really?
I don't think so.
This is
I
what
don't
happened.
think so.
Yeah, this is what happened last time. Did you want to do it again? Not really.
Yeah.
Not really. No, it's utterly horrifying. And what is the size of the battle? You know what I mean? What is the size of the battle on your hands? We know you're going up against like a multi, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars that these companies bring in a year. How do you combat that?
Well, I've always said it's like we're like a little tiny David going up against a huge Goliath. And it's almost enough. It's almost enough to make you give up. But I got to tell you, the documentary on Amy's disappearance or, kidnapping, smuggling, brought us more attention than anything we've ever done in Congress. And 20 years later, if somebody had told me, hey, you know what, Jamie, this is great. You guys go do this, do everything you can, but nothing's really substantially going to happen. The public's really not going to know about it for 20 years. I don't know whether I would have had the stick-to-itiveness, to keep after it. But for me, and I think for almost all of our members that are actively involved in the organization, certainly those of us who have been, lost loved ones or have been sexually assaulted, feel like, we got to find some meaning in this. Something has to come from this.
Yeah.
And it's, just I know in my head and heart that if the opposite had happened, if I had died and, my daughter was left to be the one to, investigate and to persevere and to try to get justice for me, she would have fought like a tiger. And, I told myself, how can I do any less? How can I do anything less? And so that's sort of what drives you. But the awareness and the eye-opening that came about because of the Amy Bradley documentary, I just can't express what it has meant to us, and people like you having us on to talk about it even more. It's so important. Iva Bradley and I, we've known each other through the years, but since the beginning of this documentary being filmed and still, for a while there, we were talking almost every day and certainly every week. And we never hang up the phone that we don't say, I love you, because we get it.
Yeah.
It's such a small family going up against such a huge, gigantic problem. And it's time we got some attention focused on this issue.
Yeah, it needs attention and it needs justice. One of the things that we've learned over the years, and we've had a number of law enforcement officers, we've had a number of people on who deal with homicides, and well, it's difficult to listen to for us. But one of the things that we have learned is that there isn't just one victim that day. That resonates through families and friends and everybody suffers and everybody's life changes that day. So we'd love to think at some point you get justice for your daughter. We'd love to think that the Bradleys get justice that they deserve, that Joe Smith gets the justice that he needs, for his family. Because it's unsettling to know, there's something that should be a happy occasion, a holiday, something that you're going to look back on the photographs for years to come and remember the journeys and the trips that you took and the things that you did ends in tragedy. It's difficult to listen to. It's very difficult, but it's important that we do listen to it. It's important that we learn from it. And it's really, really important to prevent it from happening to anybody else going forward. So, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story. We wrap these things up round about an hour, and it's been difficult to listen to at points. I'm not going to lie, but I hope people take enough away from there. We will add into the show notes of the audio version of the podcast the website, so you can go and click, and you can go and have a look, and you can see the stories there for yourself, and you can learn a little bit more. And hopefully it just gives some people an inkling or an insight into what is going on out there and the dangers that you can face when you think that you're safe. The idea that you're out in international waters and you're being policed by security who represent the cruises and nobody else is a very, very dangerous thought.
Isn't it? And please know, if your listeners do that and they go on our website, if they have, after Amy's airing of the docuseries, we had so many people write us and tell us their story. And the ones that broke my heart the most were the ones that happened 10, 15 years ago. And they had no one to go to or share that story with. Nobody that would listen to them. And so they've held that loss or that pain in for all these years. And that just breaks my heart all over again. So let us know if something has happened to you. Let us know. Write it up. Send it to us. We'll put it on our website. That's the only way people are going to continue to find out.
Amen. Guys, I don't know if you've seen that documentary series, but if not, I would definitely recommend you watching it because it's quite shocking. Have you got any final thoughts before we wrap up the episode, Gaza?
I haven't seen it. It is something that I will look at. It's one of the reasons I do the podcast, and one of the reasons that I've continued to do the podcast for the last 5 years, or however long we've done it for, is to be educated in things that I didn't really know a lot about. And this episode is absolutely one of those things. And I just want to thank Jamie for, sharing her story, sharing her insight into, the perils and pitfalls of cruising. And I know millions of people a year will experience it and not experience anything negative. And Beans is one of those people. But, I do this because I want to connect with people and I want to learn myself. I want to educate myself, but I also want to provide our listeners an opportunity to educate themselves as well. And absolutely, as I just said, this is an episode that 100% has done that. So just from me, Jamie, a personal thank you, and a thank you on behalf of all of our listeners for sharing what you have done. And I genuinely hope that you do get justice and you do continue to do the great work that you've been doing.
Thank you. I just can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you guys inviting me to come and giving me one more chance, to do this. I appreciate it.
Anytime. And listen, if you ever want to come back on again, the offer there is there. It's open for you. And and hopefully we can share some positive stories going forward about justice that's been brought.
Yes.
But,
yes.
We've got to be hopeful. We have to be hopeful. Did you want to leave our listeners one final little bit of food for thought?
I think it would be like we've just said, though, there's a world of things that could happen to someone on a cruise. Just try to make yourself aware of what they are if you really want to go, and stay as safe as you possibly can. If what we do saves one life, it's worth it. It's worth it.
Yeah, 100%. You know, this, you know, we do a lot of daft episodes, we do a lot of serious episodes, and this is one of the certainly more serious episodes that we've covered. And I make no apologies for that whatsoever, because as soon as Vic told me your story, I wanted to share it out there, and I wanted our listeners to hear it. And hopefully, you know, maybe if we, like you say, if we save one person, we make, you know, we make a difference in somebody's life, then what we've talked about in the last hour or so has been 100% worth it. So, as Gaz said, it just leaves it to me to say thank you very much for joining us. And thank you very much for sharing your story. Like I say, go visit the website, go watch the stories on Netflix, because it's shocking, but it's true. And you need to be aware of that. So, we hope that nobody has nightmares tonight after listening to these stories, but really, really important that you do listen to them. And hopefully, like you say, we make a difference. So thank you, Jamie. And
Friends around the mic, kicking back. Alright. Day turns into night, podcast in the spotlight.